Tonight, you drift into the white quiet world of mountain men. Men who learn to bend blizzards, coax shelter from nothing, and sleep beneath winters that tried very hard to kill them. You breathe in slowly, and the air is so cold it feels like it might politely sandpaper your lungs. Snowflakes drift around you in a quiet swirl, the kind that looks peaceful from the safety of a fireside window, but feels more like an unfriendly handshake from nature when you're standing inside it. You're here now, wrapped in a rough wool coat that smells faintly of pine smoke, wet sheep, and a life that never quite gets warm enough. This is the world of the mountain men, trappers, traders, wanderers, survivors, moving across the spine of the Rocky Mountains in the early 1800s. And you, very gently, are one of them. Well, at least for tonight. You probably won't make it through this day, but don't worry, that's part of the charm. Before we wander deeper into the cold, take a soft moment to like and subscribe. It helps this tiny campfire of a channel stay lit. And if you're still awake enough to move your fingers, comment the place you're listening from and the local time. Mountain men loved keeping track of time, mostly to complain about how quickly winter arrived. A soft wind combs through the pine branches overhead. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The snow comes down harder as you follow a narrow trail, more a suggestion than a path. Your boots sink with a muffled crunch, the kind of noise snow makes when it's so cold it resents being stepped on. Somewhere behind you, a lone raven croaks once, as if to say, "Bold choice being out here." Mountain men had a simple philosophy about weather. If it's trying to kill you, try to kill it back with stubbornness. This didn't always work, but historically speaking, they were very dedicated to the concept. You walk beside a ridge dusted with drifts that lean like white dunes. The wind whips up a powdery spray, and for a moment the world goes blurry, just white on white, like a poorly drawn painting of a snowstorm. But soon you spot something ahead. A shape, small at first, then forming into a cluster of thick, bent-over pines. A good start. Shelter for mountain men often began with what nature had already built. One major historical fact: pine thickets provided some of the warmest natural protection, acting as windbreaks and trapping warmer air from the ground. Men would burrow beneath them, piling branches to form a low, dense hut. And tonight, that's what you're walking toward. The pines creak as you push through, as if they disapprove of your presence. Snow falls from a branch and hits you squarely on the shoulder, nature's version of a hello. Beneath the trees, though, the world quiets. The wind holds its breath. The snow on the ground feels thinner, lighter, less like a frozen ocean. You kneel and begin pulling branches aside. A few old needles cling to your gloves. Your breath fogs into little clouds that float upward and vanish, like unsubtle reminders of your body heat escaping. You really should stop doing that. A low shelter must be built here, something small, tight, efficient. Not cozy exactly, more like slightly less lethal. The mountain men didn't care about headroom. If you could sit, curl up, and not freeze, congratulations. Luxury accommodations. You start gathering deadfall branches. They snap easily, brittle with cold. You layer them in overlapping rows. The work warms your hands slightly, though not enough to feel smug about it. A squirrel watches from a nearby tree, judging your technique. Mountain men often reported that animals seemed unusually unimpressed by their survival efforts. Historians still debate whether this was a sign of stress-induced imagination or just universal squirrel attitude. As you work, you recall one obscure cultural tidbit. Many trappers lined their shelters with muskrat skins when available, not for warmth, but because muskrat fur doesn't freeze stiff as quickly as other pelts. It's not glamorous, but neither is freezing to death with rigid bedding. your shelter takes form. A sloped frame of branches, thick piled boughs on top, and a narrow opening barely wide enough for you to wriggle into. A mountain man's sleeping pod. The blizzard's version of a studio apartment. When you crawl inside, the pine scent wraps around you. It's sharp, resinous, a little wild. The floor is cold, but the air inside is instantly calmer. Even a flimsy barrier from the wind is enough to raise the temperature noticeably. You settle in and listen. Outside, the storm growls softly. The snow whispers against the branches. Somewhere deep in the forest, something hoots or possibly sneezes. Hard to tell with wildlife. This shelter isn't perfect. It won't be warm, but it will keep you alive long enough to try something better tomorrow. And as the wind slides over the pine needles like a long sigh, you close your eyes. The day is ending. The cold still bites, but a little less fiercely now. The pines are your walls. The snow is your roof. And your breath becomes a tiny hearth inside this green, resin-scented cocoon. You drift. You wake slowly, as if your body isn't entirely convinced that waking is a good idea. Your breath has frosted a faint white crust along the inner roof of your pine hut, nature's version of interior decoration. When you shift, a branch pokes your hip like it's trying to remind you that comfort is imaginary. But you're warm enough to move. That's something. The storm outside has calmed to a muted hush. When you crawl out, your joints make sounds normally associated with old wooden floorboards. The morning air touches your face with the gentleness of a slap. Your eyelashes feel crisp. A thin glaze of ice clings to your coat. You stand there for a moment half proud, half wondering why you ever agreed to reenact the lifestyle of people who routinely took naps at -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, you need something sturdier. Pine shelters worked in a pinch, but mountain men often used them only as transitional survival. Just enough to make it through a night when a blizzard ambushed them like an overly aggressive sales pitch. You stretch, shake off snow, and start walking. Your boots crunch through a new layer of powder so clean it almost feels rude to disturb it. The sun is low, pale, and kind of shy, like it doesn't want to be involved in today's events. As you hike through a clearing, you see something ahead, boulders, large ones, clustered in a shallow horseshoe shape. Nature once again doing half the construction for you. Mountain men were masters at turning landscapes into real estate. This will be the spot. The first thing you do is look for snow accumulation patterns. One major historical fact for this section: mountain men commonly built snow-walled shelters, using compacted snow as insulation, much like early versions of a crude igloo but mixed with local timber and rock. Snow, ironically, can be warm when it's packed tightly enough to form layers of insulating trapped air. You start with your hands, scooping and slapping snow into place. The slow work. Your fingers sting. But the wall begins to rise, curving around the rock formation. The idea is simple. Build a half igloo, half cave, fully desperate little refuge. As you pack the snow, you remember an obscure but very real tidbit. Some trappers line the inside of their snow shelters with the dried bark of cottonwood trees, because cottonwood fibers hold heat unusually well for how flimsy they look. You glance around, no cottonwoods in sight. Too bad. You would have appreciated the upgrade. Occasionally you pause to breathe and stretch your back, which is beginning to regret its involvement in this project. The sky overhead is clearing, and you can see long streaks of pale morning blue emerging through the thinning clouds. A raven circles lazily, maybe the same one from yesterday, still disappointed in your choices. By midday, your shelter feels like something real. Snow walls shoulder high, rocks forming the back half. A roof of pine branches layered thick and sealed with more snow to keep the heat in. You carve a small sleeping trench inside because heat rises, Even in the wilderness, physics refuses to take a day off. You test the space. You fit. Barely. This is fine. Mountain men often slept curled like commas, partly for warmth and partly because nature seldom provided rectangular nothingness to lie in. As you smooth the snow inside, you think about how these men lived months without beds, mattresses, or even guaranteed shelter. Historians still debate whether their startlingly high survival rates came from skill, stubbornness, or simply never having good enough sense to stay home. When the last bit of snow is packed, you step back and admire your work. It's not pretty, but it's beautiful in that gritty, you didn't die today sort of way. You crawl inside. It's dim but peaceful. The snow muffles sound, turning the world into a thick, soft blur. You can hear your own breath echo faintly. This little frozen cave is warmer than the outside air already. Your body heat will raise the internal temperature just enough to keep you safe. Another miracle of mountain logic. You lie back. The walls glow faintly with reflected light. The space feels like a quiet pause in the middle of the world's longest winter. Snow, rock, pine. Breath, cold. Stillness. This is survival. You close your eyes, listening to the steady hush outside. Another night begins, and the mountains, ancient and indifferent, lean in close around you. You wake inside your snow-walled shelter with the familiar feeling of being half frozen and half proud of yourself, like someone who survived a night in a hotel made by an overly enthusiastic polar bear. A faint bluish glow presses through the snow above, soft as breath. The air is cold, but not the my soul has become an ice cube cold you endured yesterday. Progress. You stretch as best you can, which is not very far because this shelter is just slightly larger than the inside of an ambitious mailbox. Your knees pop. Your back complains. Your neck wonders why it was included in this adventure at all. When you crawl out, the morning hits you with a crisp sting. The world is white, quiet, and utterly still. Snow like powdered sugar covers everything. The boulders, the pine boughs, even your boots from yesterday, which now resemble two small frozen loaves of bread. Today, you need something more permanent. Mountain men didn't rely on the same shelter every night. They adapted, improvised. They built depending on weather, terrain, and how irritated the wilderness seemed to be that day. You brush frost from your coat and begin hiking downslope through a forest of tall spruces. The trunks rise like cold pillars into a sky that can't decide whether it wants to be blue or silver. Your breath trails behind you in long white ghosts. A few minutes in, you hear the faint trickle of water, rare in deep winter. A creek. Where there's water, there's wood. And where there's wood, there's the possibility of a lean-to, the classic mountain man beginner home. A major historical fact for this section. Mountain men frequently built lean-to shelters with angled roofs facing away from the wind, using logs and bark sheets arranged to reflect heat from a fire. It was one of the simplest but most dependable survival structures. You follow the sound until you reach a narrow stream cutting through the snow. On one bank, several fallen trees lie conveniently like an invitation, or like nature saying, "Fine, here. Try this." You kneel beside a log and test its weight. It's heavy, damp, mildly resentful. Perfect. You drag it toward two upright spruce trunks that naturally form the beginnings of a frame. Snow sprays around your boots as you work. You set the log across, then pull branches, bark slabs, and other deadfall to layer over it. Each piece snaps and sighs as if giving up its woody ghost. This lean-to will need a backing wall, angled roof, and side braces. Not elegant, but elegant wasn't really the vibe out here. As you attach long branches diagonally, you remember an obscure tidbit. Some trappers insulated the inside of lean-tos with dried bundles of grasses they called Buffalo blankets. Not actual blankets, but mats of thick prairie grass woven crudely by hand. They weren't pretty, but they added a surprising amount of warmth and made decent bedding when you didn't mind waking up covered in seeds. You stack pine boughs over the roof, layering them like shingles. Sap smears onto your gloves, gluing your fingers together in places. Wonderful. Now you're sticky, cold, and building something. True mountain man energy. When you finish, the lean-to looks like something between a home and a large woodland disappointment. But it'll do. You gather stones for a fire ring, arrange them in a half-circle facing the open side of the lean-to, and begin coaxing sparks from your flint. The first few sparks do nothing, just brief fireflies of hope that vanish. The next few land on the dry tinder. A curl of smoke rises. A spark catches. A flame licks upward, tiny but determined. Within minutes, the fire crackles brightly, radiating heat into the little shelter. The warmth hits your face, and for the first time since arriving in this frozen world, you feel a piece of yourself relaxing. You settle onto a pine bough mat inside your lean-to. The fire flickers. The roof above muffles the wind to a low whisper. The snow reflects the firelight like soft amber glass. Mountain men often slept in places just like this. Close to the flames, close to the earth, wrapped in blankets smelling faintly of smoke, animal hide, and long journeys. Historians still debate whether these men were genuinely tough or simply too stubborn to admit they were cold at all. You lie back. The fire cracks. A spark snaps like a tiny star. Warmth spreads across your face, slowly, gently. You drift into another night, wrapped in a shelter carved from winter itself. Your eyes open to the orange glow of dying embers. The fire lasted through most of the night. A blessing. Your lean-to, though humble, feels like a small miracle. The roof is frosted with a thin sheet of silver ice. The boughs rustle softly overhead. A little snow has fallen in one corner of the floor, forming a polite, unobtrusive pile. You sit up, stretching your back until it cracks in ways that make you question the durability of your spine. Outside, dawn is arriving gradually, like it's tiptoeing in so it doesn't disturb you. Old mountain men often said, "If you wake up warm, you probably overslept." You did not oversleep, but you did survive, and that counts. Today you need something even sturdier because lean-tos are good for a night or two, but blizzards in these mountains could last days, weeks. Sometimes they arrived early, uninvited, like in-laws during the holidays. A stronger shelter means logs, real logs, and that means the beginnings of a mountain man log windbreak, the predecessor to a true winter cabin. You stamp out the fire, pack your gear, and look uphill. A cluster of aspen trees stand there, pale trunks glowing like ghostly candles in the morning light. They're thin but workable. You head toward them. Your boots crunch rhythmically across the snow as you walk. Birds flit overhead. A curious snowshoe hare freezes when it sees you, as if trying to decide whether you're dangerous or just deeply confused. Probably both. A fallen aspen lies on the ground, half buried in snow. You kneel beside it. The bark peels easily, revealing pale wood underneath. You begin chopping through a section using your hatchet, the rhythmic thud echoing softly through the trees. Aspen logs aren't perfect, but they're straight, lightweight, and abundant, ideal for a temporary wall. One major historical fact for this section: mountain men frequently built log windbreaks, half cabins with a solid wall on one side and a tarp or hide stretched across the front to block wind and reflect heat from a fire. They were quick to assemble and saved lives more times than records can count. You drag the cut logs to a shallow dip between two large rocks. The placement matters. Rocks hold heat, block wind, and add stability. Nature's free construction service. You begin stacking the logs horizontally, notching their ends just enough to keep them from rolling. Your breath clouds heavily as you work. Snowflakes drift lazily down. A pair of crows watch from a nearby branch, making little noises that sound suspiciously like they're judging your craftsmanship. The wall grows, log by log, layer by layer, until it reaches shoulder height. You smear snow and mud between the gaps. Primitive mortar. Ugly but effective. You pause, hands aching, shoulders stiff. But the structure stands. Next comes the cover. Mountain men used buffalo hides, elk hides, even old canvas if they were lucky. You have a heavy wool blanket and a sheet of tough cloth salvaged from your pack, your modern replacement for those old materials. You stretch them across the front poles, pinning the edges with rocks and snow until it forms a snug barrier. Inside, the space feels instantly warmer, protected, like a tiny winter pocket carved out of the world. Now you need heat. You gather more stones to form a reflective fire pit facing the wall. When the fire burns, its warmth will bounce off the stone and the logs, washing the inside of the shelter with golden heat. As you spark the tinder, another obscure historical tidbit floats into your mind. Some mountain men hung strips of dried sage above their sleeping areas, believing it purified the air and kept away bad spirits, or at the very least, unpleasant smells. You don't have sage, but you do have the memory of it, which is spiritually about 3% effective. The fire catches beautifully, flames licking upward in orange ribbons. The heat spreads quickly, sinking into the logs, reflecting into the shelter. You sit inside, legs tucked beneath you, soaking it up. The warmth feels like a quiet victory. Mountain men spent entire winters in places like this. Snow deep outside, fire crackling within, nights long and silent except for the distant howl of wolves or the groaning of trees under heavy ice. You lean back against the log wall. The fire snaps softly. Smoke curls gently upward. Outside, snow falls in slow, lazy spirals. Historians still debate whether these shelters were simply necessities or whether the men found a strange kind of peace in them. A rhythm. A solitude that made the world feel bigger and smaller all at once. You close your eyes. The stone warms your shoulder. The fire warms your face. And winter, for the moment, leaves you gently alone. You wake the next morning to absolute silence. The special kind of silence only mountains know how to make, where sound doesn't so much disappear as get held carefully somewhere out of reach, like a child hiding a toy behind its back. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders from the night's awkward sleep, because no matter what mountain men wrote in their diaries, sleeping on a fir-bough mattress feels a bit like trying to nap on a very determined broom. Outside, the wind seems to be politely waiting for you. You suspect it is gathering its energy. You also suspect this is not good news. A pale blue light leaks through the cracks of the log shelter you built yesterday. You listen. Nothing at first, then a soft hiss, as if the mountain is whispering, "You might want to stay inside today." It's a reasonable suggestion. But you push open the door anyway, and a blast of needles in your face. Snow greets you with the enthusiasm of an overeager dog. Except this dog is made of ice. And it's not friendly. The world outside is a blur. Snowflakes whip sideways, trees groan, and the sky has forgotten what color it used to be. You step back inside quickly. This is the weather equivalent of a firm nope. You settle onto your spruce bough bed and wrap your blanket tighter. A little voice in your head mutters that you probably won't make it through this day, but not because you're in mortal danger, simply because the atmosphere is aggressively nap-friendly. You check the fire, carefully feeding it the driest wood you have left. Mountain men carried fire steels and often kept embers alive for days, sometimes traveling with a tiny fire pot, a clay container with smoldering coals so they never had to start from scratch. Historical fact of the section. A coal pot saved time, energy, and your fingers, which may freeze before the fire steel sparks do. Snow begins piling against the outside wall. You hear it. Yes, you hear snow accumulating. It makes a soft shuffling noise, like someone sweeping a floor made entirely of cotton. Your shelter trembles now and then. Nothing dramatic, just a friendly reminder that nature is extremely talented at stress-testing architecture. You glance up at the rafters. They're holding, for now. But you remember what you saw yesterday during your firewood walk. The way snow gathered on the north side of trees, leaning in heavy drifts. And then comes that special moment, the one every mountain traveler knows well. The wind shifts. Suddenly the entire forest inhales sharply, and the temperature drops another handful of degrees, as if someone said, "Actually, let's make this more interesting." You feel it through the logs, through the soles of your boots, through the breath you exhale. Now you understand why real mountain men didn't waste a moment of daylight. They worked like their lives depended on it. Because they did. And because storms didn't politely schedule themselves. An obscure bit of frontier lore comes to mind, that some trappers claimed they could predict a blizzard by how loud their knees popped in the morning. You listen to your own knees, just to double-check. Nothing yet. A good sign or a bad sign? Who knows? Historians still debate whether this joint-popping weather forecast was actual folk knowledge or just a glorified excuse to complain. You decide to trust your instincts instead, and your instincts say, reinforce the shelter. You spend the next hour pushing snow against the outside walls. Yes, snow. Counterintuitive, but mountain men knew snow could act like insulation, compressing into a protective barrier that blocks the worst of the wind. Your shelter becomes part cabin, part igloo, part questionable engineering experiment. Inside, the temperature actually rises, a small victory in a world currently made of ice. You warm your hands near the fire, listening to the logs crackle. The blizzard howls outside in long, dramatic gusts, like it's auditioning for the role of Furious Wind number 2 in a stage play. Your stomach growls. You rummage for food. Smoked meat, hard biscuits, a few pine nuts. Technically edible, emotionally questionable. You chew slowly and let the heat seep into your bones. By the time the light outside dims again, you realize you've done the most mountain man thing possible. You survived the day by not doing much of anything. A kind of triumph, really. You settle in, the wind screaming, the fire glowing, your eyelids drifting. Somewhere between consciousness and sleep, you think about how good your bed back home is, and silently promise to never, ever insult your mattress again. You don't remember falling asleep. You only remember waking to a sound that doesn't belong. First it's faint, a deep thump in the distance, soft, rhythmic, like someone beating a carpet with poor time management. You lie still, listening. Another thump, closer. Then a crack, sharp, hollow, the sound of a tree limb surrendering to the storm. So that's it. The blizzard is rearranging the forest. Comforting. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. Your breath fogs the air around you like a tiny storm of its own. The fire has died down to embers, glowing weakly like sleepy red fireflies gathered for warmth. You coax new life into it, not because the cabin is freezing, though it is, but because the tiny ritual gives you something to focus on. Mountain men talked about this, not the poetic version, but the practical truth. Keeping your mind busy was as important as keeping your fingers warm. One wrote that during week-long storms, he spent hours carving doodles into wood, just to keep the winter ghosts from crawling into the brain. You poke at the fire and decide he was probably onto something. That rhythmic thumping returns. You pause, listening again. It's snow falling off tree branches. Heavy, wet snow that slides, then plummets. Harmless, but startling enough to make you check your roof. Still holding strong. You lean back, listening to the cabin creak and sigh. If a building could talk, yours would be saying, "I wasn't designed for this, but I'm doing my best." Outside, the world is still chaos. Wind whistles between the logs. Snow hammers the roof, and distant cracks echo through the valley. You wrap your blanket tighter and breathe into your hands. Even inside your shelter, you feel the sharp cold trying to sneak in. You wonder how mountain men stayed warm before thick blankets and modern gear. And then you remember, they layered everything. They wore multiple shirts, fur outerwear, even stuffed moss between clothing layers if necessary. Moss, functional if not glamorous. Historical fact of the section. Some mountain men lined their boots with dried grass as insulation, a trick adopted from indigenous peoples living in the region. It worked. It was cheap. It also made your shoes smell like a wet meadow. You pull your own boots off, just in case your toes decide to freeze out of spite. The night drags on slowly, as nights do when there is nothing to do but exist. You tidy your gear. You adjust the roof supports. You check the snowpack outside once, then retreat quickly because the wind hits you like a flying sack of angry rice. Back inside, the fire becomes your world again. A tiny sun with a lot of responsibilities. You find yourself staring at your hands, the knuckles dry and cracked, the nails rimmed with soot. It feels like you've aged a century in 48 hours. You wonder, not for the first time, why anyone chose to live like this voluntarily. Independence, adventure, a sense of freedom, sure, but also hunger, frostbite, and zero plumbing. Some scholars still debate whether early mountain men were admirable minimalists, or simply people avoiding all forms of responsibility. You smile a little at that. You sit back against the log wall, letting the heat wash over your face. Your eyes grow heavy, your mind slipping into that soft place where thoughts drift like slow snowflakes. You think of the creek you walked past days ago, how gentle it was, how loud it must be now, frozen at the edges, roaring underneath. You imagine the mountains towering over you, ancient and indifferent, yet somehow protective. A distant boom shakes you awake. Avalanche. Not near you, but close enough to be felt. A reminder of how powerful winter truly is. You breathe deeply and remind yourself, your shelter held through the night so far. And that's enough. You curl under your blanket, fire humming softly, storm shrieking outside, your mind slowly drifting again. Sleep comes in waves, short, thin layers like snow settling on branches. You accept it, letting the warmth of the fire soften the edges of your thoughts. By the time dawn hints faintly through the cracks, you realize something miraculous. You made it. You actually made it. Even if you look like a slightly thawed swamp creature. When you finally push open your eyes, the world feels muted. The kind of muted where even your thoughts arrive wearing soft slippers. The storm hasn't stopped, not exactly, but it's shifted into something gentler. A slow, drifting snow that feels almost apologetic. After the chaos of the night, you sit up, rubbing the stiffness from your shoulders. And for a long moment you simply listen. No crashing branches, no shrieking wind, just the soft hiss of snow settling. It's peaceful, dangerously peaceful, like a toddler who suddenly went very quiet. You stretch your legs, your boots still cold from the day before, and you decide it's time to attempt something bold. Leaving the shelter, you take a deep breath, pull your blanket around you like a cape, and push open the door. Or at least you try to. The door budges 3 inches before hitting something solid. Snow. A lot of snow. The blizzard has basically gift-wrapped your shelter. You press your shoulder against the door, pushing harder, the wood groaning like it's in an arm-wrestling match with winter. A crack of light appears. Then another. Then an avalanche of snow pours inward, burying your boots, spilling across the floor, and giving you the faint sensation that your home is being invaded by cold marshmallows. You shovel the snow aside with your hands, mountain man style, which is to say very inefficiently. Eventually you squeeze out into the world, and the world looks taller. Everything is buried. The trees are coated in fresh white armor. The creek is hidden beneath a quilt of snow, and your shelter is now half the height it used to be. The snowpack is deep enough that when you take your first step, you sink down nearly to your knees. This is less walking and more politely falling forward. You look back at your shelter. It resembles a lumpy mound, like a pastry someone forgot in the oven. You realize mountain men actually prepared for this kind of thing. They carried snowshoes, those big, slightly ridiculous wooden frames woven with rawhide. They looked like tennis rackets, if tennis had been invented by someone who disliked speed and joy. Historical fact of this section. Snowshoes were often borrowed from indigenous designs, particularly from the Cree and Ojibwe peoples, whose patterns were optimized for different types of snow. You admire the idea of snowshoes. You wish you had snowshoes. You would accept even badly made snowshoes. You would accept 2 very flat pancakes right now. You push forward anyway, carving a narrow path with your legs. It's exhausting. You have walked perhaps 3 yards and you're pretty sure you deserve a medal. You glance up and notice something odd. The wind has created sculpted ridges, sastrugi, long, wind-carved waves of snow that run like ripples across the landscape. They're beautiful. They're also extremely annoying to walk across. As you navigate the uneven hills, you see tracks you didn't expect. A thin line of impressions curves around your shelter. A mountain hare. Its little footprints look like someone stamped tiny exclamation marks in the snow. Mountain men often relied on animals like this for food, but you watch the tracks with more philosophical curiosity than culinary ambition. Besides, you're fairly sure this hare could outrun gravity itself. Your nose tingles from the cold. Your eyelashes collect snowflakes. Your breath rises in soft white ghosts. It's peaceful. You take a few more steps, and then something else catches your attention. A shape, half buried under a drift. You brush snow away and uncover a bundle of branches. Stacked neatly by the creek bank, the firewood pile you made on day 1. Survived. Barely. But it's still here. And for a moment, you feel like the mountains have offered you the world's quietest high five. Dragging the wood back toward the shelter is another story. It's like hauling a stubborn toddler through a sea of whipped cream. Halfway through the journey, you have a fleeting moment of clarity. Mountain men were in phenomenal shape. Historians still debate whether this fitness came from necessity, or simply because everything in the wilderness weighed more than it should. By the time you reach the door again, breath steaming, legs trembling, arms numb from the cold, you feel something else too. You're getting good at this. Well, good might be strong. Let's call it less bad. Inside, the fire greets you with a sleepy crackle, as if surprised you made it back. You collapse onto your spruce bough bed, melting slowly into its uneven comfort. The storm may not be over, but for the first time, you feel like you're learning the rhythm of this place. The mountains are teaching, and you're listening, and somehow, you're still here, still warm, still safe, still moving forward, step by slow step, snowdrift by snowdrift. Takes a long time to thaw out. A sensible amount of time? No. The kind of time where you start reconsidering all your life choices, including the decision to be born in a climate that produces winter. You warm your hands by the fire until they sting, the painful little fireworks that mean your fingers have remembered how to exist. Eventually the ache fades, and you feel ready to tackle the next great challenge of frontier life. Not going absolutely stir-crazy. The storm still lingers outside, a slow swirl of white that makes the edges of the world feel soft and dreamlike. It's the kind of weather that gently informs you that productivity is illegal today. You don't argue. Instead, you sit by the fire, sorting through the tools and supplies you've collected so far. A small hatchet, your knife, the remnants of your firewood, and, of course, your increasingly questionable food supplies. Mountain men often survived on pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, a superfood before superfoods were cool. Historical fact of this section. You do not have pemmican. You have dried meat that tastes a little like regret. You take a bite anyway, because your stomach gently reminds you that freezing to death is almost as bad as starving to death. Almost. While you chew your leathery breakfast, you take stock of your situation. Your shelter is holding. Your fire is alive. Your firewood supply is replenished, sort of. Your legs have not abandoned you out of spite. You're doing fine. Mostly. Probably. You hear the storm shift with a low, distant moan. The sound of wind passing between cliffs, like the mountains are singing an off-key lullaby. It's then that you remember something you read once. Mountain men believed you could hear weather coming if you listened closely enough. They claimed the air grew tighter, the world quieter, right before a storm changed direction. Out of curiosity, you hold your breath and listen, and you do hear something, a faint, barely noticeable hum, beneath the crackle of your fire. Is it the storm? Is it the trees settling? Is it your stomach complaining again? Historians still debate whether frontier weather lore was actual wisdom or extremely confident guessing. Either way, it passes the time. You shift closer to the fire, feeling the warmth soak into your clothes, and you begin to understand something important. The mountains have rules, and they don't bother explaining them twice. Rule 1. When the weather is calm, you work. Rule 2. When the weather is not calm, you do not work. You huddle. You wait. You sip the warmth of the fire like it's tea at a fancy cafe. Rule 3. Everything takes longer than you think, especially thinking. Rule 4. Never trust the sky. It lies all the time. The storm thins slowly, and you watch snowflakes drift lazily past the cracks in the logs. This is the gentlest version of the blizzard, the cooling down period after the tantrum. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of smoke, pine, and cold air. And then something unexpected happens. A bird chirps. You snap your eyes open. A bird? Now, in this icy wilderness? You lean closer to the door crack, listening. There it is again. A tiny, determined chirp, somewhere out in the trees. A mountain chickadee. Small, stubborn, cheerful, and apparently not concerned at all about the avalanche-prone, frostbite-friendly world around it. For centuries, mountain men considered chickadees a sign of resilience, a reminder that even the smallest creatures could survive the deepest cold. You step to the doorway to peer out, and for a second you catch sight of it. Black cap, white cheeks, puffing its feathers dramatically, as if to say, "Yes, it is cold. No, I am not impressed." You envy its confidence. You also admire its body heat strategy. Puff up like a grumpy marshmallow. Not elegant, effective. You step back inside, the cold biting instantly at your face. Your shelter's warmth wraps around you like an old blanket. A few snowflakes swirl through the doorway, landing on your boots, melting slowly. You sit on your bough bed, hands wrapped around warm air above the fire, and notice something you almost missed. A thin beam of sunlight, piercing through the clouds. Just the edge of it, barely there, but enough to spark an idea. Tomorrow, if the storm truly passes, you might finally explore. There's more to this mountain, more to learn, more to build, more to survive, and more to understand about how people carved life into landscapes like this. You breathe out slowly, your breath swirling like soft gray ribbon. The day ends with gentle crackles, quiet snow, and the slow settling of your heartbeat. As you drift into evening calm, you feel yourself soften into the moment, as if you, too, are becoming part of the mountain's quiet rhythm. You close your eyes, and sleep comes easily, the warm kind, like sinking into a memory where the fire never goes out. You wake to silence, a new kind of silence, not the muffled hush of a storm, not the tight, wind-choked quiet of danger, but a calm, stretching, peaceful stillness that feels almost warm, almost. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, listening to the faint creak of your spruce bough bed responding like it, too, is waking up slowly and politely. Your fire has died down to a red, pulsing heart, but the coals glow as if whispering, "I didn't leave. I was just resting my eyes." You feed it a few small sticks, and it comes back to life with a sleepy crackle, the sound of a tiny creature reluctantly returning from a nap. You pull on your boots, still cold but not icy, and step toward the door. When you push it open, the world doesn't fight you this time. No resistance, no avalanche. Just a gentle drift of powder slipping inside with a sigh. And then you see it. Sunlight, actual sunlight, warm and bright, pouring across the snow like melted gold. For a moment, you just stand there, soaking in the glow, as though sunlight is something rare and breakable. In the mountains, it is. You take a cautious step outside. The air nips at your cheeks, but the warmth of the sun settles on your shoulders like a familiar hand. Everything sparkles. The snow shines with a brilliance that makes you squint, as if the entire mountainside forgot it was supposed to be intimidating, and decided to try being glamorous instead. You walk a few steps, your boots crunching in the new crust of snow, a satisfying, crisp sound that feels like nature's version of stepping on bubble wrap. The landscape looks transformed. Icicles hang from tree branches like delicate glass ornaments. Frost outlines every twig and pine needle. Animal tracks, fresh ones, cross in looping paths between the trees. Something stirs inside you, a small spark of curiosity. Wrapped in the warmth of sunlight, maybe it's time to explore. Not far. You're not trying to become a wilderness ghost just yet, but far enough to learn more about how mountain men moved. through a landscape that was constantly shifting beneath them. You walk toward the ridge, where yesterday the wind sculpted waves of snow. Today, those same waves glimmer like a frozen ocean. Halfway up, you notice another set of tracks, larger, heavier, wandering along the tree line. A deer. You follow quietly, your breath forming slow clouds in the cold morning air. Mountain men use tracks like these for navigation, for hunting, and occasionally for entertainment when boredom reached terminal levels. An entire generation of wilderness experts became surprisingly good at reading footprints. Historical fact of this section: some trappers could look at a single track and tell not only the species, but the animal's weight, speed, and mood, which feels slightly invasive but impressive nonetheless. You try to imagine determining whether the deer was in a good mood. You decide mountain men probably made that up to sound mysterious. You keep walking, until a sudden crack echoes nearby, a branch snapping under the weight of old snow. You stop, listen, wait. After a moment, the forest settles again, calm and still. You continue up the ridge, and when you reach the top, the view steals your breath. Endless white stretching across mountains and valleys, sunlight spilling in slow waves, and the sky a gentle blue bowl overhead. You stand there, feeling small in the best possible way. The world is huge, cold, magnificent, and here you are, a small human with cold toes, and a shelter that looks like a snow-covered potato. But you're surviving, thriving even, in your own inefficient way. You make your way back toward the shelter as afternoon settles in, the sunlight softening, shadows stretching long and gentle across the snow. Inside, your fire greets you warmly, your spruce boughs creak with welcome, and as you settle in, you feel the quiet satisfaction of someone who has begun to understand how mountain life truly works, not by conquering it, but by listening. You close your eyes, the fire humming softly beside you, and let the warmth sink deep into your tired bones. Tomorrow will have its own challenges, but right now, you rest. You wake to dim light, the color of early morning before the sun decides to commit to the day. The air smells of cold pine and wood smoke, and your breath forms tiny clouds above your spruce bough bed. You stretch slowly, like someone who knows rushing is illegal in these mountains. Your shelter groans around you, with settling, snow shifting, the quiet language of a place still half asleep. Outside, the world is still pale and soft. Snowflakes drift lazily, not a storm, not a threat, just the mountains reminding you who's in charge of the ambience. You step outside, boots crunching gently, and breathe in the crisp, sharp air. Today feels different, not dangerous, not chaotic, just calm. Mountain men treasured mornings like this. A clear sky after a storm meant opportunity. Gathering more wood, checking traps, repairing shelters, or simply taking a moment to exist without fighting the weather. You take a slow walk toward the creek. The ice has thickened overnight, but beneath it you can hear the faint trickle of water still moving, like a whispered conversation beneath glass. A strange little fact pops into your mind. Obscure cultural tidbit. Some early trappers believed you could tell future weather by the sound of creek ice. A high, sharp tone meant cold days ahead. A lower, groaning tone meant warmer temperatures coming. You kneel and listen. The ice makes a soft, resonant hum, and you realize you have no idea what that means. Historians still debate whether this was genuine meteorology, or just something mountain men invented because they were bored. The sun rises slowly, pouring warm gold across the ridges. Your breath puffs out like tiny silver clouds. As you stand in the light, you feel a surprising emotion, gratitude, not because the mountains are gentle, they aren't, but because they've let you stay. You head back to your shelter, add wood to the fire, and settle down for the long quiet of the afternoon. And now, the fire settles into a low, steady glow, each ember pulsing softly like the heartbeat of the room, and you ease yourself down onto the spruce bough bed, feeling the layers of pine, smoke, warmth, and memory wrap gently around you as though the mountains themselves have softened their edges just long enough to let you rest without worry or effort. Outside, the snow continues its slow drift, falling in the quiet, patient way that winter sometimes chooses. When the storm is long finished and all that remains is the delicate work of tucking the world back under a white blanket, each flake settling so lightly on the branches overhead that it barely seems to land at all, and the forest breathes in long, deep rhythms, like a giant creature settling into sleep. Your eyes grow heavy as the fire crackles, its soft orange light brushing across the walls, dancing gently along the grain of the wood, and you feel your thoughts stretching out into longer, softer lines, letting go of the tight edges of the day, loosening like snow sliding quietly from a pine bough, effortless and slow. The wind hums lightly outside, not sharp or cold now, but gentle, steady, almost melodic, a long, drifting sigh moving through the valleys and across the hillsides, carrying with it the soft creak of distant trees and the muted rustle of branches shifting under their winter load. You breathe in slowly, the air cool but calm, and you feel the warmth of the fire meeting the cold of the mountain air. Somewhere in the center of your chest, where the contrast becomes a kind of quiet balance, a steady warmth that settles lower, 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 until it becomes the soft weight of sleep itself, drawing you down into the deep stillness of the night, where the storms have passed, the world has slowed, and everything around you rests under the peaceful hush of falling snow.